The wax infiltration ship, Vanguard, plunged through the dense atmosphere of the Trion-controlled world, its sleek, obsidian hull shimmering as it cut through the thick clouds. Inside the cockpit, the hum of energy conduits pulsed beneath the pilot's fingertips, synchronizing with the ship's rapid descent. This was supposed to be a covert insertion, Lyra growled, gripping the armrest as turbulence rattled the ship's frame. She cast a sharp glance at Alpha, who stood braced against the wall behind the pilot's seat. "Guess subtleties out the airlock." "They knew we were coming," Alpha replied, his glowing eyes narrowing as he studied the approaching storm of enemy fire on the holographic display. "Trion scanners are more advanced than we anticipated." The ship's sensors flared red as an alarm blared. "Warning, lock-on detected. Multiple inbound projectiles." "Evasive maneuvers," barked Kieran, the pilot, his hands flying across the controls. The Vanguard veered violently to the right, its thrusters screaming as it rolled through the air, narrowly dodging a barrage of glowing projectiles that streaked past like fiery comets. Explosions detonated in the skies around them, illuminating the cockpit with bursts of crimson and white. A streak of plasma fire clipped their left wing, sending a violent tremor through the ship. The hull groaned in protest as metal superheated, melting in jagged lines across its surface. "We're hit," Kieran cursed, yanking the controls. Losing stability, rerouting power to stabilizers. Below them, the landscape of the Trion outpost sprawled in a maze of brutalist structures, dark metallic spires stabbing into the sky like jagged blades. The outpost was a fortress, its perimeter lined with high-energy turret emplacements that spewed rapid bursts of green plasma, tracking their every movement. "We won't make it to the designated landing site," Kieran warned. "I'm taking us down now." The ship dove sharply, plunging toward a desolate stretch of the outpost's outskirts. More anti-air blasts tore through the sky, barely missing their hull as the Vanguard spiraled downward. The G-force crushed against them, pressing bodies into seats, vision narrowing to pinpricks. "Brace for impact." The Vanguard slammed into the ground, skidding across the metallic surface in a hail of sparks. The landing gear buckled under the force, sending the ship into a wild spin before it finally screeched to a halt against the ruins of an abandoned Trion storage depot. Smoke curled from the hull, the scent of scorched metal thick in the air. Silence. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of venting steam, the crackling of fried circuitry. Then, boom. The main hatch blasted open as Alpha led the charge, stepping into the warlit night with his energy shields flaring to life. Lyra followed, weapon drawn, scanning the perimeter. "They're coming," she muttered, sensing the vibrations in the ground. From the shadows of the towering structures, Trion patrols emerged, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights of the outpost. Their weapons charged, aimed directly at the wax operatives. Alpha clenched his fists, raw energy swirling around his form. His voice was steady, cold. "Then let's welcome them." The moment Alpha stepped onto the battlefield, the night ignited with gunfire. Blazing streaks of Trion energy bolts cut through the darkness, searing across the ruined depot. The wax infiltration team fanned out, moving like ghosts between the jagged remains of collapsed structures, their energy-based weapons humming as they powered up. Alpha raised his arm, channeling a pulse of raw energy through his form. The first incoming volley slammed into the invisible barrier he projected, dispersing harmlessly in a burst of crackling light. In the same motion, he redirected the energy outward, sending a concussive wave rippling through the air. The nearest Trion soldiers were flung backward, their armor sparking as they collided with the walls. Lyra moved in tandem with him, her rifle snapping up to fire precise bursts of golden light. Each shot found its mark, striking weak points in the enemy armor. A Trion warrior lunged at her from the side, blade humming with ionized energy. She twisted at the last second, ducking beneath the sweeping arc of the blade, then drove a concentrated energy blast into his chest. He crumpled instantly. "More incoming," Kieran shouted from cover, slamming a charge into his weapon. He fired a rapid burst, the shots ricocheting off a Trion soldier's armor before finally piercing through a weak joint at the neck. The soldier collapsed, dark fluid pooling beneath him. The ruined depot became a war zone. Smoke curled in thick, acrid waves from the burning wreckage of the Vanguard, casting shifting shadows that made it impossible to see the full scale of the enemy force. The Trions were relentless, moving in coordinated strikes, their bulky forms disturbingly fast despite their heavy armor. Alpha darted forward, dodging an incoming strike as a Trion officer swung a massive, crackling warblade at him. He caught the weapon mid-swing, his fingers wrapping around the burning hot metal. The Trion's glowing eyes widened in disbelief as Alpha absorbed the energy directly into his palm, then retaliated in an instant, slamming a charged energy blast point-blank into the soldier's chest. The impact sent him flying, his armor caving inward from the force. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Lyra barely had time to react before an explosion rocked the ground beside her, sending her sprawling. She hit the debris hard, her vision swimming as dust clouded her view. The Trions were bringing in heavier artillery now, long-range plasma mortars from deeper within the outpost. Alpha sprinted toward her, shielding against another incoming barrage. We can't hold this position much longer. Kieran vaulted over a fallen column, sliding into cover beside them. We need to move fast. If they pin us down here, we're dead. Lyra gritted her teeth, pushing herself to her feet. Then we take the fight to them. Alpha scanned the battlefield, calculating the best route. A narrow pathway through the wreckage led deeper into the compound, shrouded in darkness and scattered debris. It was risky, but their only chance. Stay close. We go in quiet. The team disappeared into the ruins, vanishing into the shadows just as another artillery round obliterated the spot they had just occupied. The battlefield was left in chaos, but the Trions weren't done hunting. And neither were the Wax. The ruins swallowed them whole, the towering remnants of the old colony casting jagged shadows beneath the iron-gray sky. Smoke and ash drifted through the air, mixing with the acrid scent of scorched metal. Alpha led the team through the shattered corridors of a long-abandoned processing plant, his senses stretched to their limit. The Trions were closing in. They're flanking us, Kieran said, pressing against the rusted frame of a collapsed doorway. His voice was steady, but the way his grip tightened around his rifle told another story. I count 3 teams moving in from the east and 2 more cutting off the south. They're pinning us down. They don't want to chase, Lyra said. She crouched low beside a broken support beam, her sharp eyes flicking between the distant shadows where the enemy moved. They want to crush us in one strike. Alpha's mind raced. The mission was falling apart too fast. Their initial insertion had already gone sideways, and now the Trions were adapting quicker than expected, adjusting their tactics with unsettling precision. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. If they kept moving as a single unit, they would be funneled into an ambush and wiped out before ever reaching their target. There was only one solution. We have to split up, Alpha said. Kieran's head snapped toward him. Absolutely not. Lyra stiffened beside him, her hands balling into fists. You're not serious. It's the only way, Alpha said, his tone firm. If we stay together, we're an easy target. But if we divide our forces, we create 2 problems instead of 1. Kieran exhaled sharply. We're already outnumbered. If we cut our strength in half, we're even weaker. Alpha shook his head. No, we won't be weaker, we'll be unpredictable. He turned to Lyra, knowing she wouldn't like what came next. You take the diversion team. Make it loud. Pull as many of them off our backs as you can. A dangerous silence stretched between them. Lyra stared at him, eyes burning, the muscles in her jaw tightening. I should be the one pushing forward, she said, barely keeping her voice controlled. Not this time. I'm faster. I can get in and out before they even know. I said no. Alpha stepped closer, his voice quieter but carrying undeniable weight. We need a distraction, not a one-person suicide run. She didn't back down. And you think splitting us up isn't suicide? If we don't, we're already dead. Alpha shot back. A sharp whistle rang through the air, followed by the distant boom of an explosion. The Trions were getting closer. They didn't have time for this. Lyra's hands twitched like she wanted to hit something. Maybe him. But after another breath, she turned away and checked her rifle. "You better not get yourself killed," she muttered. Alpha allowed himself the briefest smirk. "I could say the same to you." She scoffed and motioned for her squad to move. "All right, you heard him. We make noise. Big noise. Let's give these bastards something to chase." Kieran cursed under his breath, slamming a fresh charge into his weapon. "I hate this plan." "You always do," Lyra said, glancing back one last time. Something flickered in her expression, frustration, concern, or maybe something she wasn't ready to say. Then she turned and was gone, disappearing into the wreckage with her team. Alpha exhaled, already feeling the weight of the decision pressing against his ribs. He turned to his remaining squad. "We move now. Stay low, stay fast." The ruined corridors stretched before them, and somewhere ahead, buried deep beneath layers of security, was the key to stopping the Trion's superweapon. And they were running out of time. Here's part 4, love and frustration, packed with emotional depth, internal conflict, and the relentless tension of war. Alpha moved like a shadow through the ruins, his squad following closely behind. Every step was calculated, every motion silent. The broken remains of the colony stretched out around them, twisted steel beams jutted from the ground like shattered ribs, half-collapsed structures loomed overhead, and the faint flicker of dying holographic signs still clung to the walls, their messages long forgotten. He should have been focused entirely on the mission, on the superweapon, on the Trions hunting them. But all he could think about was Lyra. He knew she was out there, leading the diversion, drawing the enemy's attention toward herself. He knew she was fast, skilled, one of the best fighters he had ever seen. But it didn't matter. The idea of her being outnumbered, dodging fire, trapped in the same deadly chaos that surrounded them, it made something tighten in his chest. It was infuriating. He had fought wars. He had led armies. He had seen soldiers die by the thousands. But this was different. This was her. He clenched his fists, forcing himself back to the present. They reached the edge of a collapsed walkway, overlooking a trench of jagged debris. Across the way, the heart of the Trion facility loomed, a monolithic structure of black metal and pulsating blue veins of energy, like the lifeblood of some mechanical beast. The air itself hummed with raw power, radiating from the fortress. "This is it," Kieran whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "The entrance to the lower levels is just ahead. If those blueprints were right, that's where they're keeping the core." Alpha nodded, scanning the area. "And where's the welcoming committee?" As if on cue, the faint sound of boots crunching against metal echoed through the ruins. A Trion patrol emerged from the shadows below, heavily armed and moving in perfect synchronization. Their helmets gleamed under the artificial lights, reflecting the cold efficiency of their kind. More were stationed near the facility entrance, their rifles ready, their movements precise. "This won't be easy," Kieran muttered. "They're dug in deep." "We adapt," Alpha said. "We wait for the right opening." An explosion ripped through the air, shaking the ground beneath them. A column of fire shot into the sky from somewhere in the distance, followed by another burst of rapid gunfire. The Trion patrols snapped to attention, voices barking orders in their harsh, guttural tongue. Lyra, Alpha's fingers curled so tightly his knuckles went white. She was out there, under heavy fire, taking the brunt of the assault. This was the plan. He knew that. But knowing didn't make it any easier. Kieran looked at him. "That's our distraction." Alpha forced himself to breathe. "Then we move." They descended quickly, sticking to the cover of the ruins as they closed in on the Trion facility. The diversion was working, the enemy was shifting their focus, sending more units toward the battle raging in the distance. But not all of them. One Trion soldier turned toward their position, his visor flickering as his scanners swept the area. Alpha moved before he could react. He surged forward, closing the gap in an instant. The Trion barely had time to register the movement before Alpha struck, his energy-infused blow collapsing the soldier's chest plate inward. The force sent him hurtling into the wall with a sickening crunch. The remaining guards spun toward them, but the wax squad was already in motion. Kieran fired first, his rifle spitting golden streaks of energy, dropping one enemy before he could raise his weapon. The others retaliated, sending bursts of green plasma scorching through the air. Alpha moved through the chaos like a force of nature. He weaved between the attacks, his energy shields flaring as he deflected shots back at their source. He caught another soldier by the wrist, twisting the weapon from his grasp before driving an elbow into his throat. The Trion fell, gasping for air. Kieran took cover behind a crumbling column, exchanging fire with the last enemy. The Trion was pinned, but refusing to fall, his armor absorbing hit after hit. Alpha didn't give him a chance to recover. He lunged forward, gripping the soldier's helmet and slamming him down into the debris with a thunderous impact. The body went still. Silence settled over the area. Kieran exhaled, checking the ammo count on his rifle. That was messy. No alarms, Alpha said. They didn't have time. They turned toward the facility entrance. The path was clear for now. But Alpha's mind wasn't on the mission. It was still on Lyra. On the distant sounds of battle. On the fact that she was still out there, still fighting, still in danger. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had trained himself to think beyond emotion, beyond attachment. It had been necessary. The battlefield didn't care about feelings. But that logic shattered when it came to her. He hadn't realized how much she meant to him until the moment he had sent her away. Kieran studied him for a long moment before speaking. She'll be fine, you know. Alpha didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure if he believed it. And if she wasn't, if something happened to her, he wasn't sure what he would do. He took a steadying breath, pushing everything else aside. The mission wasn't over. And there was still a war to win. The entrance to the Trion facility loomed before them, an imposing structure of blackened steel and pulsing energy conduits, humming with barely contained power. The walls, lined with intricate Trion glyphs, pulsed faintly as though the fortress itself were alive. Alpha could feel the charge in the air, the hum of something immense hidden beneath the surface. This was no ordinary outpost. This place is wrong, Kieran muttered, eyes scanning the towering structures ahead. I can feel it. The whole damn facility, it's humming. He wasn't wrong. Alpha could sense it too, a deep, resonant pulse, like a heartbeat reverberating through the walls. Something powerful was here. Something dangerous. We keep moving, Alpha said. His voice was low, steady, but the weight of the moment pressed against him like an unseen force. The team advanced through the ruins, staying low as they approached the facility's outer perimeter. Trion patrols still lingered, their armor glinting under the artificial light, but the diversion had worked. Most of the forces had already left to chase Lyra's squad. That didn't mean this was easy. Alpha motioned for the others to stop. He studied the security layout, motion sensors embedded in the walls, aerial drones sweeping the upper walkways, reinforced checkpoints guarding the inner corridors. The Trions had layered their defenses meticulously, but even they had weaknesses. We take the maintenance shaft, he said, pointing toward a narrow service entry near the base of the fortress. It's shielded from aerial scans, and if we move fast, we'll bypass the main security grid. Kieran nodded. And if they catch us in there? Alpha didn't hesitate. Then we don't let them. The squad moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, every step calculated. The shaft's access panel was reinforced with a biometric lock, Trion-coded. Alpha crouched, placing a hand over the scanner. Energy pulsed through his fingertips, syncing with the circuitry beneath the surface. His abilities, an unnatural blend of synthetic intelligence and raw power, worked against the lock's defenses. The glyphs flickered in protest, then dimmed as the panel hissed open. They slipped inside. The corridor was tight, the walls pressing in as they navigated the confined space. Overhead, the hum of power conduits grew louder, an unsettling reminder of the energy surging beneath their feet. They reached a junction. Alpha peered through a grated vent, scanning the room beyond. The core of the facility stretched out below them, a vast chamber filled with towering crystalline structures, each pulsing with an eerie, shifting glow. At the center, suspended above a gravity field, was the reason they had come. The superweapons core. It wasn't a machine in the traditional sense. It was alive. An orb of pulsating energy, swirling with raw power, its surface shifting between forms, liquid, solid, something in between. The air around it crackled, distorting space itself. The Trions weren't just building a weapon. They were harnessing something beyond their understanding. "What the hell is that?" Kieran whispered. Alpha didn't answer. His mind raced, piecing together what he was seeing. This wasn't just a weapon. It was something ancient, something powerful, something Lyra had seen in her visions. A warning. They had to destroy it. But how? The security in the chamber was overwhelming, multiple guard stations, automated sentries, and a fail-safe mechanism built into the energy conduits. One wrong move, and the entire facility would go into lockdown. "We need to take out the security nodes first," Alpha said. "If we shut down their fail-safes, we can overload the core without triggering a countermeasure." Kieran studied the layout. "That means splitting up again." Alpha's jaw tightened. He hated it, but there was no other option. "Take 2 and disable the outer conduits. I'll handle the core interface." Kieran didn't argue. "See you on the other side." As the squad moved into position, Alpha remained behind, staring down at the pulsing, living weapon. A storm was coming. And if they failed here, there would be nothing left to stop it. The plan was unfolding with precision. Too much precision. Alpha moved through the maintenance passage toward the core interface, the pulsing energy of the Trion weapon casting eerie reflections across the metal walls. His team was in position, Kieran and the others working to disable the outer conduits, their comms a steady murmur of updates in his earpiece. It was working. And yet, something felt wrong. Alpha's instincts, honed through countless battles, screamed at him. The mission was going too smoothly. The Trions had designed this place to be impenetrable, a fortress of technology and defense. And yet, no alarms had been triggered. No reinforcements had swarmed in. They were being led into something. "Kieran, status," Alpha whispered, pressing against the wall as he scanned the chamber ahead. 2 conduits down, Kieran responded. "No resistance so far. We're moving to the 3rd. No resistance." That wasn't possible. Alpha clenched his jaw and stepped into the main chamber. The core hovered above its containment field, swirling with raw, unfathomable power. He approached the terminal, his fingers ghosting over the interface. Then he felt it. A presence. Too late. The moment he turned, the energy barriers slammed down around him, locking him inside the core chamber. Across the facility, alarms shrieked to life, red emergency lights casting the room in a blood-colored glow. It was a trap. His earpiece crackled with static before Kieran's voice cut through. "Alpha, what the hell just happened?" "The mission's compromised," Alpha said, already looking for a way out. His mind worked fast, calculating escape routes, override sequences, anything. A slow, deliberate sound echoed from the corridor behind him. Footsteps. Alpha turned sharply, his body tensing as a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping past the flickering security field. It was someone he knew. Someone who shouldn't be here. Yarrick. Alpha's pulse surged with something close to fury. Yarrick had been with them since the beginning, one of their best strategists, a trusted member of the Resistance. He had fought beside them, bled beside them. And now he stood there, unarmed, calm, watching Alpha with something unreadable in his expression. "I was hoping you'd be the one to make it here," Yarrick said, his voice quiet. Alpha's hands curled into fists. "You did this." Yarrick tilted his head slightly, as if considering. "I gave you a chance. You were never supposed to get this far, but, well, I always knew you'd find a way." Rage burned through Alpha's chest, but he forced it down. "How long?" Yarrick sighed. "Does it matter?" Alpha's mind raced, piecing together every off detail, every strange gap in their intelligence, every time things had gone too smoothly. Yarrick had been feeding the Trions information for weeks, maybe longer. Kieran's voice came over the comms, filled with static and panic. "Alpha, we're pinned down. They knew exactly where we were going." "Of course, they did." Alpha took a step forward, his energy crackling just beneath the surface of his skin. "You sold us out." Yarrick didn't move. You don't understand, Alpha. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Yarrick exhaled, something almost regretful in his expression. You think you're fighting for something real. That this war is about freedom. But you don't see the whole picture. The Wax can't win this. The Trions aren't just another empire. They're the future. Alpha moved. Faster than thought, faster than speech. His hand snapped out, grabbing Yarrick by the collar and slamming him against the wall. The impact rattled through the chamber, sending ripples through the energy field. Yarrick barely flinched. You can kill me, he said, meeting Alpha's gaze. But it won't change anything. You've already lost. Alpha's grip tightened. His body burned with fury, betrayal cutting through him deeper than any blade. But Yarrick wasn't wrong. The trap had been sprung. His team was in danger. Lyra was out there, still fighting. And he had wasted too much time already. His mind snapped back to the mission. Escape. Regroup. Finish this. With a final shove, he released Yarrick and turned toward the interface. He had one chance to disable the core before reinforcements arrived. One chance to turn this betrayal into nothing more than a delay. Yarrick straightened his jacket. You won't make it out of here. Alpha didn't answer. He had no intention of dying today. He had a war to finish. The fortress was collapsing into chaos. The moment the alarms blared, the Trion facility transformed into a war zone. Security reinforcements poured in from every direction, boots pounding against steel, weapons glowing with lethal energy. The air vibrated with the hum of containment fields shifting, automated defenses locking into place. And in the center of it all, Alpha moved like a storm given form. He didn't hesitate. There was no time for second thoughts, no room for regret. His hands ignited with raw energy, and as the first Trion soldier charged into the core chamber, Alpha struck with the force of a collapsing star. The blast hit the soldier dead center, caving in his chest plate before hurling him back with enough force to dent the reinforced walls. Another soldier swung a plasma-forged blade, a weapon designed to cut through even the strongest energy fields. Alpha ducked under the arc, grabbed the Trion by the wrist, and twisted. The snap of bone was drowned out by the soldier's choked scream, cut short as Alpha drove an energy-infused strike into his throat. Blood splattered across the floor. The scent of burning metal and seared flesh filled the air. Then the room exploded. A detonation rocked the facility, and for a split second, the world tilted sideways. Alpha hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, his vision swimming with static. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard Kieran's panicked voice over the comms. Alpha, Lyra's here. She. A second explosion drowned him out. Alpha pushed himself up, shaking off the disorientation. The core chamber's security doors had been blown clean off their hinges, smoke curling from the ruins of the blast. And through the haze, stepping over the bodies like a specter from another world, was Lyra. Her armor was splattered with blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Her energy blades crackled at her sides, their edges still glowing from the heat of fresh kills. And in her left hand, dangling by a twisted mess of severed tendons and sparking cybernetics, was a Trion's head. She tossed it aside like garbage. "Miss me?" she asked, her voice raw with exhaustion and adrenaline. Alpha's chest tightened, not with fear, not with anger, but something far more dangerous. Relief. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were useless. Lyra never did what she was supposed to do. She stepped closer, eyes scanning him, checking for injuries. Yeah, well, neither were they. She nodded toward the dozen corpses littering the corridor behind her. "You're welcome." He almost smiled. Almost. Then the ground shook again. The security systems were fully online now, the facility shifting into full lockdown. Defense turrets activated along the upper levels, and a new wave of Trion reinforcements surged in, their armor heavier, their weapons crackling with upgraded power. Alpha and Lyra stood back to back. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," she said. Alpha flexed his fingers, letting the energy build between them. "Then let's make it worse for them." They moved as one. Lyra lunged first, ducking under a barrage of fire as she closed the distance between her and the nearest Trion. She feinted left, then twisted midair, bringing her blade down in a clean, merciless arc. The soldier barely had time to scream before his head hit the floor. Alpha wasn't far behind. He caught a rifle midair, yanking it from a soldier's hands before driving an energy blast straight through his chest. The body crumpled, but Alpha was already moving, slamming another opponent into the reinforced wall hard enough to leave a dent. The battle was a whirlwind of movement, of fire and blood and raw, unchecked fury. Then Yerrick stepped forward. The traitor had swapped his wax armor for a Trion officer's combat gear. He held himself with the confidence of a man who had already won, his eyes cold and calculating as he leveled a high-powered disruptor at Alpha's chest. "This was never your fight," Alpha, Yerrick said. "You were built for more than this." Alpha met his gaze, something unreadable flickering behind his golden irises. "You're right," he said. Then he grabbed Lyra's wrist and hurled her forward. Yerrick barely had time to react before Lyra was on him, her blade flashing in a perfect arc. It cut through his armor like paper, slicing through his shoulder and collarbone before embedding itself deep in his chest. Yerrick gasped, a sound of pure shock. He looked down at the blade buried in his torso, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Lyra leaned in, her voice a whisper against his ear. "You should have run." Then she ripped the blade free, twisting as she pulled. Yerrick collapsed, his body convulsing as the life drained out of him. The light in his eyes flickered once, then faded. Alpha exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't relief. It was just done. They didn't have time to dwell on it. The core pulsed violently now, destabilizing from the sheer chaos around it. The air crackled with unchecked energy, the entire facility shaking beneath their feet. Lyra wiped the blood from her blade. "We need to move." The facility was tearing itself apart. The moment Yerrick hit the ground, alarms screamed across the structure, their shrill wails blending with the sound of fracturing metal and rupturing energy conduits. The core, destabilized by the carnage surrounding it, pulsed in erratic bursts of power, warping the air with its unrestrained fury. "Containment breach detected," a cold, synthetic voice droned through the speakers. "Facility lockdown imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Lyra wiped Jarek's blood off her blade and exhaled sharply. "That sounds bad." Alpha scanned the crumbling chamber, watching as fractures spread through the reinforced walls. The Trions hadn't built this place to withstand its own destruction. The entire structure was turning into a death trap. "We need to move," he said. "Now." The remaining wax operatives scrambled into formation, their armor scorched, their weapons running low, but their resolve unshaken. Kieran emerged from the side corridor, dragging one of the wounded with him. "I'd love to talk strategy, but we've got a fresh wave of Trion reinforcements coming in fast." Alpha turned toward the exit tunnels. The only way out was through the upper launch bay, a stretch of exposed ground that would leave them vulnerable to enemy fire. Lyra adjusted her grip on her rifle. "Then let's make it fast." They ran. The corridors were a battlefield, filled with flickering emergency lights, automated defense turrets losing control, and Trion bodies strewn across the floor, some still twitching from failed cybernetic overrides. Alpha led the charge, his boots pounding against the shaking metal, his mind focused only on one objective: survival. A blast erupted behind them. The shockwave sent Lyra stumbling, but Alpha caught her arm and pulled her forward before she could fall. "Keep moving." A squad of Trion enforcers appeared at the far end of the corridor, weapons raised. Lyra didn't slow. She launched herself forward, sliding beneath their initial volley, then sprang up behind the nearest soldier, her energy blade humming as she drove it up through his ribs. Before his body hit the floor, she had already wrenched the blade free, pivoting in one fluid motion to slice through the next. Kieran and the others opened fire, cutting down the remaining enemies before they could react. "We're exposed out here," Kieran barked, slamming a new charge into his rifle. "We need cover, or we're screwed." Alpha scanned ahead. The launch bay doors were closing, thick blast shields sealing off their only exit. If they missed this window, they'd be trapped inside as the facility collapsed. "Get to the platform," Alpha ordered. "I'll handle the doors." Lyra didn't like that plan. "You're not staying behind. Go." For once, she didn't argue. The squad sprinted ahead, ducking behind fallen debris as another detonation shook the walls. Alpha turned toward the failing control panel near the bay doors. The system was fried, sparks flickering from shattered circuits. There was no time for overrides, no time for precision. Fine. He'd do it the hard way. Alpha placed both hands against the metal and let the energy flow. The air around him vibrated as his power surged into the machinery, forcing it to respond to his will. Sparks erupted from the console. The gears groaned in protest. The doors shuddered, stalled, then slowly, painfully, began to retract. The strain burned through his limbs like molten lead. The moment the gap was wide enough, Kieran shouted, "We're clear. Get out of there." Alpha pushed harder, forcing the final mechanisms apart. The blast doors gave one last defiant groan before finally locking open. He turned. And then he saw it. A Trion war mech, easily 3 times his size, stepping through the flames of the collapsing structure. Its heavy armor gleamed under the flickering emergency lights, and in its right hand, a fusion cannon crackled with energy. It fired. Alpha dove as the blast struck where he had stood a second ago, vaporizing the control panel behind him. He rolled to his feet, dodging another blast that sent molten slag spraying across the walls. Lyra turned back. "Alpha, go," he roared. The mech charged. Alpha met it head-on. It swung a colossal fist, but he ducked beneath it, pivoting into a brutal uppercut that sent a surge of energy rippling through its frame. The mech staggered, but recovered fast. Its left arm lashed out, catching Alpha across the ribs and sending him crashing into a rec supply crate. Pain flared through his side. Something was broken. Didn't matter. The mech aimed its cannon at him, energy crackling along its barrel. Then Lyra leapt onto its back. She moved with deadly precision, vaulting onto the machine's frame and slamming her blade into its exposed servos. Sparks erupted as she twisted the blade deeper, slicing through critical circuitry. The mech jerked violently, struggling to shake her off, but she clung tight, her movements ruthless, efficient. Alpha saw his chance. Ignoring the pain, he surged forward, driving both hands into the mech's core. And then he let loose. The energy blast detonated from within, ripping through the machine's systems in an eruption of raw power. Its armored frame convulsed, its servos locking in place, before the entire construct collapsed in on itself, a heap of burning metal. Lyra landed beside him, breathless. "Tell me that was the last one," she said. Alpha exhaled. "It is. For now." The squad was already boarding the extraction ship. Kieran waved frantically from the open hatch. "Unless you two want to die here, move your asses." They didn't need to be told twice. Alpha and Lyra sprinted across the platform, their boots hammering against the metal as the facility trembled beneath them. The moment they leapt inside, the ship's engines roared to life. The Vanguard shot out of the launch bay, bursting into the night sky just as the Trion fortress collapsed in on itself. Fire and metal spiraled into the void below. The mission was over. And they were still alive. For now. Lyra slumped against the wall, catching her breath. That was a nightmare. Alpha sat beside her, his own exhaustion finally settling in. He looked at her, at the blood smeared across her face, at the exhaustion in her eyes, and just for a moment, he allowed himself to feel something beyond the mission. "I told you to stay with the diversion team," he said. She smirked, tilting her head slightly. "And I told you I don't take orders well." He huffed a tired laugh. He should have been angry. But all he felt was relief. The ship rumbled as they broke through the planet's atmosphere, leaving the burning wreckage of the Trion facility behind. They had won. But war never ended with just one victory. And somewhere, in the vast cold of space, the Trions were already planning their next move. The Vanguard shot through the void, its hull still smoldering from the hell it had just escaped. The wax operatives inside sat in near silence, the weight of survival pressing down on them like a vice. Every breath felt borrowed, every second a fragile gift. They weren't safe yet. Alpha stood at the ship's rear bay doors, gripping the reinforced frame as he watched the wreckage of the Trion facility vanish below. The entire structure had collapsed in on itself, a blackened scar on the planet's surface. But it wasn't enough. The war wasn't won. And the Trions weren't done with them yet. Alpha, Kieran called from the cockpit, urgency threading his voice. You need to see this. Alpha pushed away from the bay doors, moving through the dimly lit interior of the ship. Lyra was already there, standing beside Kieran, her expression locked in something between exhaustion and restrained fury. Beyond the viewport, space itself burned. Trion warships, at least a dozen, were closing in, their engines burning like dying stars. Their formation was tight, precise, a blockade sealing off every possible escape route. And at their center, looming like a beast ready to strike, was the command dreadnought, General Kralon's flagship. They were waiting for us, Lyra said, jaw tightening. Kieran's hands flew across the controls. They're charging weapons. We won't outrun this. Alpha's mind raced. Their ship was barely holding together, their ammunition nearly depleted. The Wax fleet was too far to call for reinforcements. And Kralon wasn't the type to take prisoners. They were trapped. A direct fight meant death. A surrender meant something worse. There's a blind spot, Kieran muttered, bringing up the tactical display. A debris field from the station collapse. If we move fast. The ship rocked violently as the first barrage struck. Plasma fire shredded through the outer hull, warning sirens screaming through the cabin. No time, Lyra growled, already moving toward the weapons system. We hold the line. Alpha met her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes. Just fire. Then we make this hurt, he said. Kieran grimaced. This is insane. Welcome to the Wax, Lyra muttered. The Vanguard banked hard, thrusters roaring as Kieran brought them into an attack vector. The Trion warships adjusted instantly, moving like a pack of predators sensing fresh blood. Lyra was already in the gunner's seat, her fingers dancing across the targeting controls. Let's see how many of these bastards we can take with us. The first shot tore through the void, striking one of the smaller Trion cruisers. The explosion bloomed outward, sending debris spiraling through the blockade. But the enemy barely flinched. The dreadnought loomed closer. They're locking onto us, Kieran shouted. Brace. The next blast hit harder. Metal screeched, systems flickered. The ship buckled under the force, alarms shrieking in protest. We can't take another hit like that, Kieran yelled. Alpha's mind snapped into focus. Then we don't get hit. He pushed past the flickering control panels, making his way toward the airlock. Lyra turned, eyes narrowing. What the hell are you doing? Their targeting is locked on us, Alpha said, yanking a combat harness from the wall. That means they're not expecting something from outside. Realization dawned in her eyes. You're not serious. We've got one shot at this. Lyra stood so fast her chair nearly toppled. Then I'm going with you. No, Alpha said firmly. She stepped closer, voice sharp as a blade. You don't get to decide that. A fresh explosion rocked the ship. They were out of time. Alpha grabbed an extra harness and tossed it to her. Then don't slow me down. Lyra smirked. Not a chance. Kieran cursed. I swear, you two are going to get me killed. Just keep us flying, Alpha said. The airlock cycled open, revealing the endless void beyond. Alpha and Lyra hooked into their harnesses, magnetic boots securing them to the hull as they stepped onto the ship's outer plating. The battlefield stretched before them. The Trion warships loomed like silent titans, their weapons charging for another devastating volley. But their attention was locked onto the Vanguard. They weren't watching for two lone operatives moving in the darkness. Alpha keyed his comm. We disable their primary cannon. That buys us time. Copy that, Lyra said, already moving. They sprinted across the ship's hull, each step a delicate balance of weightlessness and sheer willpower. The dreadnought's targeting systems glowed ominously in the distance, its main cannon building toward a lethal discharge. Alpha reached the edge of the Vanguard and launched himself into space. For a brief, terrifying moment, there was nothing, just the silence of the void, the abyss stretching in every direction. Then his magnetic boots connected with the enemy warship's hull, and the impact sent a shudder through his body. Lyra landed beside him a second later, her breathing steady despite the madness of what they were doing. Alpha pulled a detonator from his belt. "We plant the charges, then get the hell out." They moved fast, placing explosives along the dreadnought's cannon array. Every second was another moment closer to destruction, another gamble against impossible odds. Then the ship's hull rumbled beneath their feet. Lyra's voice was sharp. "They know we're here." Trion sentries emerged from concealed hatches, their armor built for vacuum combat. Their weapons ignited, plasma rounds screaming through the void. Alpha dodged the first volley, flipping into a controlled roll before slamming his foot against the hull to propel himself forward. He tackled the nearest enemy, driving an energy blade through the thin plating at the soldier's throat. The body convulsed, blood freezing instantly as it sprayed into space. Lyra moved with terrifying precision, vaulting over one Trion while firing into another. A soldier lunged at her, but she caught his arm, twisting sharply before driving a knife between the plates of his armor. Alpha set the final charge. "Done. Then let's go." Lyra kicked off the hull, launching back toward the vanguard. Alpha followed, activating the detonator midair. The charges erupted in a chain reaction, fire and metal exploding outward in a violent ripple. The dreadnought's main cannon shuddered, then collapsed inward, sending debris spiraling into space. Kieran whooped over the comms. "You actually did it!" The distraction worked. The Trion formation broke, their line collapsing as confusion spread through their ranks. The vanguard shot forward, engines flaring, weaving through the chaos. Alpha and Lyra barely made it back inside before Kieran hit the thrusters, throwing them into hyperspace. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Lyra let out a breathless laugh, leaning against the wall. "That was stupid." Alpha sat beside her, shaking his head. "Yeah." She looked at him, eyes bright despite the exhaustion. "Let's do it again." Hyperspace stretched endlessly around the vanguard, the swirling ribbons of light casting eerie reflections across the ship's fractured hull. The battle was behind them, but the weight of it clung to every breath, every unspoken word. Inside the cabin, the survivors sat in exhausted silence, the dim emergency lights flickering across bruised faces and battle-worn armor. Every one of them bore the scars of what they had just endured, burns, broken ribs, blood crusted in the cracks of their uniforms. But they were alive. For now. Kieran leaned against the cockpit console, his fingers tapping mindlessly against the dashboard. "I can't believe we made it out of that." His voice was hoarse, raw from shouting over the chaos of battle. "We almost didn't," Lyra muttered, slumped against the bulkhead, cradling her arm where a deep gash had torn through her armor. Her eyes flicked to Alpha. "You're too damn reckless." Alpha didn't respond. He was staring out the viewport, past the tunnel of hyperspace, into something unseen. The dreadnought was gone. The superweapon was destroyed. Yarrick was dead. Then why did it feel like they had lost? Lyra nudged him with her boot. "Hey, you still with us?" Alpha blinked. "We're not done." Kieran scoffed. "No shit. The Trions aren't just gonna sit back and lick their wounds." Alpha exhaled slowly, reaching for the display terminal. The screen flickered as he pulled up the latest intercepted transmissions. Encrypted messages. Trion fleet formations. Tactical withdrawals from minor sectors. And one last piece of data, recently decoded. A mobilization order. Kieran frowned. "What the hell is that?" Alpha's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a dying star. "The Trion fleet is already moving." Lyra straightened. "Where?" He turned to face them, his expression carved from stone. "Wax Prime." The silence was instant. Heavy. Suffocating. Kieran paled. No way. We crippled their weapon. They don't need it," Alpha cut in. "They're not retaliating. This was never about the outpost." He tapped the screen, zooming in on the fleet formations. "They pulled back from every other front. Every last ship is converging." Lyra's breath was steady, but her hands curled into fists. How long? Alpha's golden eyes burned with certainty. 3 days. The Vanguard shuddered as hyperspace stretched around them, their course locked, their time running out. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the ship's proximity alarm screamed to life. A single word flashed across the cockpit screen. Incoming. Hyperspace ripped open in front of them. And something was waiting.